This is the Self-Taught or Not podcast with
Dylan Israel
and Eric Hanchett, where we teach you the do's and don'ts of software development from two software development professionals, one self-taught and one not. Today, we're going to talk about how to prepare for a technical interview. This is a pretty broad topic, so we're going to break it up between a couple different things. We're going to first talk about what you should do before you start interviewing, what some common interviewing questions you might get, non-technical. Then we're going to talk about two types of interviews that you're going to get, algorithm type and non-algorithm type. And there's going to be a little bit of crossover between these different topics, but I think this will be good for anyone listening. This is also really relevant for mostly web development type jobs, but I think this could cross over also into, if you're looking for that back-end job or even like game dev, stuff like that. I think there's a lot of commonalities between all of them.
Yeah, I know, our experiences in web dev, but I do have several colleagues that are in different industries, and they typically have similar ways of testing potential candidates.
And I know Dylan has been a part of many, many interviews for a lot of the companies he's worked with, so definitely he has a lot of experience in that.
Yeah, so I'm a believer that you should always be interviewing, which probably my current company won't like to hear, but I think it keeps you sharp. It keeps you to see what the market wants. And, if good opportunities come along, your current workplace should match it, or you should go and accept them. So that's sort of been always my stance. And I have been interviewing minus the first 6 months of my very first job consistently.
I'm always scared. Like once I get like a good job somewhere, I'm always like worried that if I go and interview that my current employer is going to find out or that I'm going to get in trouble somehow. I think it's just that mental block in my head. And also because interviewing, I think for a lot of people, probably not for you, Dylan, since you've done it and you're pretty good at it, is pretty scary for some people. Just change in general is scary, and interviewing and having people critique you and do snap judgments as soon as you walk in the door. It can be intimidating, and you have to get used to just people looking at you and judging you when you go on interviews.
Yeah, and you definitely have to take it as a learning experience, which is part of the reason that I do it. And I have had my sort of hand caught in the cookie jar before, if we want to go on a side tangent, because this is a 1 in a million chance that this won't happen. No one's going to know that you're interviewing 99.9% of the time. But if you happen to be that 0.01 like me, it does happen, where my current company, I had interviewed there. And you know how sometimes you go into buildings, they have those signed guest lists. So the recruiter who had got me my previous role she apparently worked with this company as well, and noticed that my name was on the sign-in sheet. And then I got like 5 missed calls over the next 2 hours from my recruiter trying to figure out what was going on, because I was relatively early on and they probably weren't going to get their affiliate or their referral fee. But it was super stressful. But, I took the call after I was done with my meeting.
Wait, the sign-in sheet for the
office, the company office. So it's a giant, 15 floors in the building. Mm-hmm. You sign in, guests sign in. The recruiter was there for a meeting as well that had gotten me my previous role and noticed my name and was like, I got to call this guy immediately.
Oh, man. Well,
but that's not going to happen.
Yeah. All right, let's just jump right into it. And keep that in mind. Just one quick tangent before we jump in is that, as Dylan said, keep it as a learning experience when you go on interviews. We've all been rejected from interviews. It's just common. I don't take it personally. I've definitely taken it a little more personally when I've been rejected for interviews. But I think after you go through so many rejections, it starts not phasing you as much. But
much like my early dating life. I was able to accept rejection early on from that and transition it to the job market.
And realize it could be a million different things why a company doesn't pick you. It could be, maybe they already had the job was filled by someone else and HR just said they had to put up the job interview, the job posting anyways. It could be because, it was something on their side, not you. Or maybe they took one small thing you said and blew it out of context, so they didn't understand your questions or answers. Who knows? So keep that in mind. So before you start, I would say A good idea in any technical interview is to start with the resume. Is before you start is to get your resume up and running. What I would recommend is try to go a little bit above and beyond the Word document resume templates that are everywhere. If you can, there's actually some nice websites that help you generate resumes. Or you can find a really nice Word document, or if you're on Mac, whatever the equivalent on the Mac is, templates out there. Start with those. Keep it simple. What website do you use, Dylan?
Yeah, so I use a site called novoresume, and I've been using them forever. And they do one-page resumes, they do multi-page depending on your experience level. They also do cover letters, which I've used in the past, and it's not a free service. They have a free version, but I use the premium version because I have been complimented so many times by recruiters who have said, this has made it so easy to see your skills. This has made it so easy. And not only that, it makes you stand out, right? The company look at it, the same 100 black and white resumes, then you have a little bit of style, a little bit of organization. I'm a big fan of theirs.
Great. That's great. Yeah, always try to make sure you can stand out. I'm not saying to the point like put your resume on pink paper and put cologne on it or perfume, but I have heard people doing that. But I don't think you should go that far. But yeah, definitely like a nice service like Novo Resume is a good idea. There's a few others if you Google it. Some cost money, some are free. Or just try to find a really good looking template if you are using Word document, something beyond the basic one.
The one thing I would say about your resume is that you want to have a clear breakdown of your skills. You want to have a clear breakdown of your projects, and with your experience, if you have any, you want to have bulleted points that somewhat match what the jobs out there are looking for to really, and include any stats or numbers to sort of put emphasis on things that you can.
I would also say the cover letter is always, for every job you apply for, add in that cover letter. Just as Dylan said with the resume, tailor the resume and cover letter to the job that you're applying for. So if they are looking for, I don't know, someone that's good at React and you've done a React job before, make sure you put in that in my previous job, I worked React, and try to be like what you accomplished and how that would relate to the company you're applying for. So a bad cover letter would be something like, I am super passionate about programming and development, and I want to keep learning. It sounds really good in your head, but everybody's super passionate about what they do. But if you kind of put it somewhere more like, I helped create a solution that reduced the latency of our website and brought up our Lighthouse score to 75 to 95, and I created a RESTful website with an API. I mean, just real examples, or even if these are examples of projects that you've just learned on your own for fun, you can put them in there, but make sure it tries to relate how it would help out your employer that you're working at before you do that.
Yeah, and I more so prefer like generic cover letters and resumes that you make minor tweaks to when you tailor it to someone, because you're typically going to be applying to a lot of jobs and you're not going to be able to write it. So one thing that I've done is I try to keep it short and brief. I have one sentence that say I have X amount of years of experience in these technologies, and I make sure those technologies are relevant. Then I include 5 to 10 bulleted single line accomplishments and include things exactly like Eric said. And then I like to end with a quote from my manager or someone above me speaking to my quality as an individual, quality as an employee. And you can get those quotes from, one way that you can go about it that I have is I've asked my previous managers to leave me a LinkedIn review, do it on there. You can also, typically pull quotes from your employee review, yearly reviews or 6-month reviews, 3-month reviews, whatever they are.
That's an excellent point. I've never done that. I know some people, if you can get your previous employer, one of your previous employers to back you up, that's great. Back in the day, people used to write recommendation letters. I think that's gone out of style. I've never heard of like anyone doing that. Have you heard of someone doing that?
So I actually always ask every former boss of mine to write me a recommendation letter. With that being said, no one's ever really offered. So I have I ask so that I can put it, and I just put it on my LinkedIn, I attach it, and I include it as a talking point when I'm interviewing, saying, I have letters of recommendations from all my previous employers, but I don't know that it means anything. But I know it's better than not having them. So typically just send an email, send a follow-up, ask for it, just be professional about it, and most people will give it to you.
Yeah, I wish I had done that in my last couple of jobs. It helps. And I know a lot of people, you can either do it, you can do it directly inside LinkedIn now. You don't even need to have an old school like Word document that they print out and send to you or email you. Another thing you should do after you got your cover letter and your resume, maybe some recommendations, create a spreadsheet. This is kind of pedantic, but I think this will help. You create 4 columns. I was just listening to a video of another YouTuber that did this and it really helped them when they're starting out, just to keep a track of what jobs you've applied for, when you applied for them, the last time you followed up with them, and if you are in the interview process, what level of interview you're in with them. One good thing to realize is that it is okay to follow up with jobs if you haven't heard from them in a week or two. If they have an email address, you can then follow up with them and see where your resume's at and let them know you're still interested. Let me say, there's also when you're applying for jobs, I would first start off with people that use your network first. So because the best way of getting a job is to know someone that's in that company, because I have seen it over and over again. I've seen candidates that haven't done that well in interviews still get the job because they knew someone there. It's just like a huge leg up. It'll get you in there. And I've heard of all sorts of ways of people being able to get a job by, even if they don't know someone in the HR or in the company that is, but be able to go around HR by either looking up the managers on LinkedIn, looking up if you have a second or third connection on LinkedIn with somebody on there. I've heard of somebody like calling up like the support number on the website and asking if they could get the manager's email address to submit the resume to, because they'll say something like, oh, I don't think you should lie, but I've heard people going to this extreme saying, oh, well, I couldn't upload my resume through the website, or I was having problems sending the resume. Can I get this person's email address? Just to get you a leg up on between all the competition.
Yeah, and I just looked up some quick stats because I'm a very big believer of like work with your network. Is that the president of something called Career Horizons, which tracks stats on the job market, says that at least 70% of job openings aren't even listed, and typically are filled before they even get to the market. And you'll skip some of those hurdles. I've talked with recruiters before where they say, not necessarily in IT per se, but in general, that they get so many applications for certain roles that they can't even go through all of them. So they work very diligently to make sure that they get an internal referral, and that it sort of narrows it down for them.
I've heard of Alumni Networks. That's why one of the reasons it's good to be in college or to get a degree is Alumni Networks really emphasize like promoting people from that college to get jobs in whatever company. So for example, I know a friend of mine, he was trying to get into this company. He was able to go through the Alumni Network, found out one of the alumni works there, contacted him and said, hey, I graduated from this university. I noticed you graduated from this university. Hey, here's my resume. Can you give me a leg up on it? And that would kind of bypassed HR, got him on top of the stack to get the job. Networking in college is a big deal too. And that kind of could be another way in to getting a job. I would also say good idea too is to work with many companies. We kind of alluded to this earlier. You're going to be applying for a lot of jobs, especially if you're a new developer. This is going to be a numbers game for a lot of you. So, after you exhausted all your networking connections, you might just have to start going down the list on Indeed and start applying for a bunch of different jobs. But be careful with the jobs you apply for. Maybe you could be like, well, any job's better than nothing, but sometimes nothing is better. So I would be wary of like really low paid jobs that require, they're junior developer jobs, but they require like 2 to 4 years of experience. There's definitely garbage jobs out there.
Yeah. There's always going to be people looking to take advantage of people in this world, and you gotta make sure that's not the case. And typically, the easiest thing to do is just go with your gut instinct and see how you feel. I've walked away from jobs that have paid more than my current role because my gut told me that I was going to be a worse developer or I was going to be miserable. So listen to your gut a lot of times.
And don't worry about, I would say, when you see the years of experience in some of those jobs, I would take, like if it says 2 years of experience, minus 2 years from that. And if you're within that range, I would say go ahead and apply. I mean, the worst thing is you get to an interview and then they realize you don't have enough experience, but at least you got to the interview and you got a little bit of experience doing that. There's a little bit of opportunity cost with all this. Obviously, if you're applying for jobs that need 10 years of experience and then there's no way you'll ever get them, and then you get to the interview and you've wasted all this time, that is an opportunity cost. You could have been doing other things. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, good things can happen. You can learn about what they're looking for and interview and what the process is like. And sometimes I've interviewed for senior level roles where they're like, you're not quite there, but we liked you, so we brought you in, and we have this other role we think that we're actually interviewing you for. I hope that's okay. I'm like, sure.
So there's 2 types of interviews that we're going to just kind of loosely lump together. There's the algorithm type interviews and the non-algorithm type interviews. I'm going to start with kind of commonalities between both those interviews. When you finally do get that resume in and they like you and they call you in for your first job interview, you are probably going to be going through some sort of technical proficiency and HR type questions. So starting off with HR, these questions you get all the time, like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Tell me your biggest accomplishment, weakness. Tell me one time you've had to overcome a challenge, like a technical challenge. Why did you leave your last employer? That's a good one. Never make fun of your last employer. Never like dig in on them, even if they were a terrible employer. That can bite you.
So I slightly disagree with this, or I want to elaborate where I think it's completely okay to respectfully explain why you're leaving your current employer and giving examples as to why. Now, nobody wants you to be like, yo, man, they're pieces of shit. No, don't do that. But if there was a reason that it led to a stressful, non-professional work environment, I think it's okay to share that. The reason for it is maybe they have things like that going on in their organization, and clearly you don't want to end up in that same environment. You don't want to leave one losing situation for another. So I think you just have to be very respectful as you're sort of explaining this sort of unfortunate incident.
That's probably the keyword, respectful. And depending on the employer, some might be, some HR people will take that to extreme, but I think if you be respectful enough, you'll probably be okay. Another good idea is usually during most interviews, they'll ask you these common interview questions. They'll also probably ask you some technical challenge, like technical type questions, but just come up with some examples. It's not a bad idea. If you're like me, I'm a guy that's always writing like Word documents and like doing a bunch of prep. Like I do a lot of prep for this podcast. I like to write stuff down. So like for me, I can't come off the cuff on a lot of these things in my experience. So I probably, when I interview, I write stuff down and just kind of give myself some examples. I try to think deep back where I've had some challenging things and how I overcame them. And then also it's time to brag during interviews. Don't be shy to brag. You want to show them your best. So if you've accomplished something really cool at your previous job that you're proud of, weave that into one of these answers to some of these questions that you're getting. Another good idea is to be relaxed, get enough sleep, be positive. Some employers want you to be excited. Don't come in like tired and like, monotone. Don't, just like be excited. Even if it's like the 5th interview of the day. A lot of times, a lot of companies will make you interview with their HR, with the tech lead, the tech manager, some people on the team that you're going to be on. Sometimes you have to interview with like upper management. Sometimes the CTO might even pull you in. So you might have like 6 interviews, 7 interviews, especially if they're really, really interested in you. And if you've gone through one of these gauntlets of interviews and you're on the 7th interview and you're like, oh, I'm going to be asked the same question I've answered 10 other times, don't let that show. Pretend like you got it answered the first time.
Yeah, and this may not all happen in the same day. I mean, sometimes it does, where you have 8-hour interview, as crazy as it sounds, and you're ready to blow your brains out by interview 6. But sometimes it'll be broken up amongst multiple days and multiple parts of it, and you just need every single part of that, whether it's same day, multiple days. You need to sort of attack it with the same amount of eagerness each and every time.
My first interview out of college was an 6-hour interview, back-to-back HR, different tech leads. We went to lunch with the team. That's another thing. A lot of interviews, especially for technical roles, you might even have to have lunch with the team, and they'll it's definitely weird having lunch with the team that you're in an interview with. I mean, if you're a very social, outgoing person, it's no problem. But for me, I'm a little bit more introverted and talking to a bunch of people I don't know, I definitely had to put on a little bit more charm and try to be relaxed in front of everyone.
Yeah, it's almost like you're on a date. I equate like interviewing very much so to dating, where you're trying to sell yourself and act like you're interested in them at the same time. And it's a little bit awkward because of that.
Let's jump into the 2 types of interviews. So let's start with algorithms. So this is really, first off, there's a huge debate online. There's a lot of developers that swear up and down that companies shouldn't do algorithm type interviews. A lot of, I would say almost developers get upset. I've seen Twitter rants, people like super upset about people asking algorithm questions. Like, I've worked in the industry 10 years. I don't know how to create a linked list. I've never needed to do this in my 10 years. People get very upset. And then people always say, like, I would never be able to do this. No one ever asked this. But the reality is a lot of jobs out there ask these algorithm type questions. A lot of jobs out there are in that mindset that it doesn't matter that you can know these JavaScript concepts or know how to create a web page in React. They want to know if you can program, and one kind of rubric of doing that is asking you these algorithm type questions. And when I say algorithm, think of algorithm as like a recipe. It's just a number of steps you need to put together to create something. That's all it really is.
Yeah, so I have sort of 2 stances on this. One, I don't like the super technical, hey, I want you to solve this using certain amount of big O notation, certain amount of iterations, or hey, I want you to solve this using a certain type of data structure or breadth first search or binary. I hate those types of questions. But I do think that you should be able to solve sort of basic intermediate ones, like a FizzBuzz type problem. Like if you can't do a FizzBuzz sort of algorithm, that is where it becomes concerning to me. So I do think there's some sort of benefit to it, but I also think that it's been taken to such an extreme that it's causing a lot of unnecessary pain almost.
That's true. My algorithm could be anything, like Dylan said. It could be like this fizz buzz, like on every, print a list of numbers on every division of 2, print something, division of 3 type something. It could be something like that, but it could also be, like, okay, we need you to figure out the optimum way of finding the path of this thing that goes from X to Y. And you're going to have to be understanding of binary search or these different algorithms, which you traditionally learn in a computer science algorithm course. Those are a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I know when I was interviewing with Microsoft is that even the first thing I would do is sort of brute force these things. And I had about 8 interviews with 3 algorithms apiece. And so you have about 20 minutes. So I'd brute force them. And then they'd be like, okay, now I want you to, optimize it using certain types of data structures, certain types of algorithms. I was like, well, shit, I haven't touched that stuff since before I dropped out of college. And even then I barely passed the course, or I don't really remember. I just memorized a whole bunch of stuff for the test.
Exactly. And if usually these type of algorithms, you either know them or don't know them. It's really hard to like stumble your way on to like a binary search if you've never done it before. So that goes into like how to get good at these type of algorithms. So obviously, like I went to interview, you said Microsoft, I went to interview with Google. After I did a couple of interviews with some of the team members, I had a 1-hour algorithm test. I was put in this room. I had a whiteboard on one side. They also gave me a computer so I can do it in Google Docs if I wanted to. And they gave me this problem, and I just had to start doing it on the whiteboard. And later on, I found out that, well, first off, I didn't get the job, obviously, but it was pretty intense. It was definitely something I had to use some dynamic programming concepts. I actually came up with an answer, but it definitely wasn't optimal. But it's pretty, what's the word? It's a little intimidating when you have to get in front of either one person or a bunch of people and have to do these algorithm type interviews. That's how it usually is. It's usually in person, on a whiteboard, or I know, Dylan, you've said you've been given like codality tests.
Yeah, so a lot of these sites that you can go and practice on, like HackerRank or Code Signal, Codality, all these sorts of algorithm sort of prep sites. They also, part of the way they make money is by having problems that companies choose to test their candidates with, where not only, oh, great, we enjoyed, you think you're great for the fit, here's a three-dimensional array where you need to do some some geometry to pull out all the possible squares. And it's like, Jesus. Okay. But yeah, I've had quite a few like that where they send you these algorithms to take. And not only that, but you obviously have like the video shares where you're in a Google Doc doing them. I have found that the ones where they just send you links, and you have like a 90-minute time limit, no one's there, seem to be ridiculously hard. They're just like, well, we're not keeping eyes on you, so you can do whatever you want with it. But if they're sort of in person or video sharing side by side, I found those to be much more manageable.
Yeah, I've had that before too, where they'll give you some sort of problem. You'll be on some Skype or Zoom with them, and then you'll just be sharing your screen and you'll be typing things out, and they'll be watching you, and you can ask them questions, which I think is easier. So how do you prepare for these type of interviews? And by the way, real quick, if you're hearing this algorithm questions and this scares you and you're like, oh crap, this is intimidating, make sure when you start applying for a job and you get that first 1 or 2 interviews that you ask them, like, what kind of interview questions do you guys ask? Do you guys do algorithms? Do you guys, try to get an idea. So that way, if they say, oh yeah, we do algorithm whiteboarding type tests, codality, then you're like, oh, okay, now I need to make sure I prepare for this. Or at that point, if you're too scared, I would say go through it. You shouldn't ever cancel an interview because you don't like the questions they ask, but I've heard of developers doing that.
Yeah, it's gotten so bad that a lot of these recruiters send me 2 to 3 pages of links of sites to study and topics to prep specifically for the interviews, because I think people are taking these things and 99 out of 100 are just failing. And they're like, well, here's a bunch of resources. I don't really know what they do, but the developer said that they would help. So go ahead and study all these things. And I kind of think that people are keeping them around in certain organizations because they had to go through it. It's sort of like almost a rite of passage, whether it really shows if you're a quality developer or not.
Yeah, exactly. And Google did the same thing. They gave me a list of resources to study before I went to the interview. So how to prepare, I would set a schedule. Obviously, if you're unemployed, you have a lot of time. So maybe set out 4 to 6 hours a day. Just start looking to give you time to start working on this, to prepare. If you when you start going to these sites, there's a bunch out there. People talk about grinding on code, LeetCode, which is a website. There's HackerRank. There's Top Coder, but you basically, what you do is these are all free services. I think Top Coder might cost money. I think some of them have premium features, but you could just go through and they have hundreds of algorithm questions like LeetCode does. And then you could just spend all day just trying them out. And I would make sure you try them out first before you look up the answer. Give yourself a time limit, maybe 15, 20 minutes. If you can't figure it out, then look up the answer, then do it. And then try not to just memorize the questions, but you want to try to understand the underlying concepts. So try to understand how to create a binary list. Binary search is like one of the basic basic algorithms that a lot of these companies ask you for. Linked list is also really common. Like, how do you create a linked list from scratch? breadth first, depth first search are a little bit harder. And then there's also a ton, I would say even more common maybe than binary search, is like array manipulation or like string manipulation questions.
Yeah, that's definitely would say I'd cover the majority of them in my experience.
The 100 algorithm course that Dylan is a great resource that you can use. Free plug
Yeah.
there.
So that was I'm all about the shameless plugs. Let me tell you, it took everything from me not to do a shameless plug in the first part of this video. But yeah, so the 100 algorithm challenge course that I have that you can get for $10 using coupon code CodingGod. That was how I prepared. I wanted to make sure that I could just start passing some of these more intermediate problems, and I noticed that I started bombing in interviews, and so I just did a couple hundred of them, and I took 100 of them and put them into a course for people. So practice makes perfect a lot of times with these things, and you just got to sort of the algorithm stuff. I really think it's a lot of be able to study those data structures and those algorithms, but really just got practice on problem solving.
And those are more common, like array manipulation, string manipulation, less on like linked list, binary search stuff, right?
Yeah,
More the common stuff.
yeah, that's the majority of it, is how do we actually break this problem down and give a solution? Because that was the majority of the jobs I've interviewed are more about array manipulation, string manipulation, get these values of the array, find stuff like that. But I would say, depending on what sort of jobs you're going for, you're going to get some of those more computer science heavy roles. I know, like Microsoft has been the example I've given, or recently I got a interview with Twitch where they wanted me to do something with a linked list, and sometimes it's a little bit hard, but you have to go and study those things and sort of understand the patterns and how they work.
Yeah, I would definitely say do both. Do the string manipulation, but make sure you understand how to solve a linked list, binary search, stuff like that. There's also a HH coding interview prep FB group I found really helpful, that a lot of people who are interviewing for these larger tech companies that are known to do these algorithm type questions will post their what they'll ask questions like, hey, I'm going to interview for Amazon next week, and they'll ask, what type of interview questions should I expect for a software development engineering one role, and people will answer them. There's also great, you just look on Glassdoor too. If you just look on glassdoor.com, it's a website that everybody puts reviews on jobs that they worked at. You can find almost any large tech company has like hundreds, maybe dozens to hundreds of interview I don't know, reviews on there, I should say, and a lot of people give away what questions they were asked, so you can kind of look and get an idea of what to expect when you go on these interviews.
This is sort of I hate this stuff, because even though I study for it because it's part of it, but this is what I think people hate about these types of questions, is that it's a job just getting prepared for the interview. Like, oh, hey, yeah, go and search out the problems on Glassdoor so you have a one-up, like, instead of just being asked a reasonable problem. Oh, hey, go spend 3 to 6 months studying certain search algorithms just because for this interview, even though you're probably never going to use it in your role. And I think that's what really frustrates me, is a lot of this stuff, it can be applied in certain roles, it definitely is, but I know, at least in the front end, if I'm having to worry about how something is, if I'm manipulating so much data that I need to optimize the solution in a very technical way, then there's something wrong with the data I'm receiving typically.
Yeah, and I think I wanted just to play devil's advocate for these companies. I would say the reason that they have these is partly because the people that work there went through it, so it's sort of a hazing requirement. But also, it's really, really, really hard to determine how well a developer is when you're interviewing them. We've all heard of, people getting hired, and you find out like they can't code at all, or they're really slow at coding, or they have a lot of problems. And the truth is, a really good developer, or even a good developer, can be like 2 times, 3 times more efficient than a bad developer. And so these companies they pride themselves on these type of questions, think that they can get rid of the people that would never be able to do well in the organization, or code fast enough, or efficient enough, things like that.
Yeah, no, I understand what they're trying to get across, but there's better ways of doing it, I think.
Another few other resources is the Cracking the Coding Interview. There's a Cracking the Coding Interview book is like the most popular probably interview algorithm book out there. It's by Gail McDowell. There's also Elements of Programming Interviews, which I've used in the past. It's a little bit more advanced than the Cracking the Coding Interview, but both of those will go through like what you should expect, the different types of algorithm type questions, more the computer sciencey type questions. They'll explain what a big O algorithm is. What does that mean? What is these different types of complexities when you write your code? How do you understand if you have a for loop within a for loop? That's probably not a good idea if you're trying to save time. So they'll explain those kind of concepts as well, which you can sort of get just going through LeetCode and some of these other websites, but having it in that form or is good to have all in one place. I know a YouTube channel called Byte by Byte. They focus on algorithm questions. He also has his own service where he'll help you with prep for an interview, technical interview. I've actually talked to him before. That's Byte by Byte. You can search that on YouTube or Google. And we've both used prep.com. It's a free service that you can just interview other people and they interview you and you guys ask each other technical questions. It's all laid out really easily. All right, so let me jump, since it's getting a little long here, let's jump into the non-algorithm type interviews. And I think this is what most people are comfortable with or more comfortable with. And these are the ones where you might still have some whiteboarding, but it might be like, instead of here is some crazy example where you have to create this program, it might be more like, here, how would you write this quick JavaScript function, or how would you put on the board how this architecture would work from a server and a client.
Yeah. It's usually a more of a high level than in the detail sort of thing where, what are the pieces and how would they work together type of thing.
You might be asked like how to create a SQL join and what the different types of unions are. Definitely, I've always gotten asked that question for some reason, especially any sort of back-end piece. People are going to ask you SQL questions. It's more common to get like take-home tests in these type of non-algorithm interviews. So they might say, here, build a website that talks to a server, and you need to here's this RESTful interface, and it'll probably maybe take 2 or 3 hours. That's really common. You've done a ton of those, Dylan, right?
Yeah, they're all very similar for the most part. They're like, hey, build a CRUD app. Like that's basically it, to make sure that you have the fundamentals of you understand asynchronous code. You can maybe map your models. There's a bunch of different ways to showcase that you can work in the core technologies and framework that they're interested in. And they can be long. Some of the CRUD apps are fine, but I've had other things like build us a calculator, and it's like I did that, but like I don't necessarily want to build you a calculator. I'll build you something, and sometimes there's the healthy balance. I know with these they seem to be growing, but they're sort of in this weird spot because a lot of developers just won't do them. There's just too much work. I don't want to deal with it.
I've heard of companies like taking bits and pieces of their actual app and then having developers that they interview do them and then actually using their code. That's usually not a good idea. And if you've noticed that they're doing that, then you should not interview those type of companies.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff will be more so they'll like give you a user story almost, where like not necessarily of their product, but hey, here's an example and just add this basic functionality sort of thing. And make sure it meets the acceptance criteria. That might be a common way that it's presented.
I've been to an interview once where they took me on site. I was flown out to their company and I spent a whole day with them, and I pair programmed the whole day. So they got to know me, how I worked. I was able to kind of jump on, and they're really like, and sometimes if you pair programming, usually one person drives and the other one writes code. And sometimes the other person kind of writes the code and the other person tells the other person what to write. It just depends on the scenario, but that's a great way. Some companies love to do that because then it gets them into like, how does a person work? What's their thought process? How do they approach different problems? Or if they get stuck, how do they fix it? And it's a little less stressful for interviewees because they aren't in front of a bunch of people on a whiteboard. They're, in kind of a little bit more of a natural environment. I've seen also interviews where the whole interview is just quizzing you on subjects that you should know. So it'd be good to practice those, but you might get asked like 20 questions on React. So if it's a React position, or let's say an Angular position, because I know Angular better than React, they might ask you, okay, tell me the different lifecycle hooks. Like, what's RxJS? What are some RxJS functions that you use? What is NGRX? How does that relate? What is the difference between a service and a component? I mean, they'll ask you kind of quizzy type questions. Once again, developers are pretty picky. Sometimes developers hate those type of questions, because then they're like, well, I could just Google all that. But it's, if you have to Google like what a component is, you're probably not a great candidate for most jobs. But I've seen those, and that's like the bulk of their data when they hire someone.
Yeah, I know that for roles that I've worked in, and that multiple roles, we do similar things, but I try to stay away from framework specific items, and more so about sort of the core, at least in the front end, speaking to the core functionality. Like, okay, how might you handle responsive design? What are some native ways? Or ask some generic JavaScript questions, like simple stuff of like, all right, what are promises, and difference between double equals versus triple equals, things that, these are on your resume, then clearly you should know the answers to. If I ask you 20 questions, at least 18. Like,
what would you say to the developers that say, well, I just Google everything, I don't know any of these questions off the top of my head?
I would say that the types of questions I ask, where if I ask you what double equals versus triple equals, or what's some ES6 functionality, and you can't speak to it, is that you haven't been coding and you've been copying things off Stack Overflow for a decade. And so it's kind of a crazy thing, because I have 15 years of JavaScript experience. Great.
And if you're a developer and you've been working for 10 or 15 years, and you don't realize at this point that you need to study for your interviews, like, there's plenty of things I do that I've only done once in Angular, that if you asked me a question on it, I wouldn't know. And there's probably some things on HTML and CSS like that I just don't deal with on a day-to-day basis. But if I'm going to interview for a front-end position somewhere, I'm probably going to spend like a day just looking over those common interview questions, and I'll know how to align a text in the middle of the page using Flex or something.
Yeah, and so I personally try to stay away from very specific questions, and more about like general stuff that, like, you of course would have had to at some point deal with asynchronous code. And let's ask some stuff about that. And it's like, ES6 came out in 2015. It's 4.5 years later. You should know about ES6. If you don't, you haven't learned anything in 4 years, and that scares the hell out of me. But like, I've had some of these. One thing we haven't talked about, or I've had a few, where recruiting agencies will send you actual quizzes to take. And I don't know who writes this stuff, but they are looking for like super, like, all right, in Angular 4.2, there's a command you could run to update to Angular 5. What is it? Like, stuff like that is absolutely absurd, but you should know sort of some fundamental questions when it comes to your core programming language that you have experience in. And like, that same thing with the Angular framework. If you've worked in Angular and you can't speak to what the major parts of it are, then what were you doing this whole time?
And you will get, it always happens, either you will get terrible questions that are really specific, like Dylan asks, or you will get just like really specific things. I think you're right. When you get into really specific things, then that is stuff that most people just Google, and then most people probably won't answer. And if you get dinged on that in an interview, then maybe it's more of the interview's fault than yours.
Here's a very bad thing I do in interviews. I don't recommend anybody do it. I'm just curious if you've ever done it. But when you get asked a terrible question, do you actually tell them it's a terrible question? Because I do.
I've never done that.
Yeah, I go out of my way to try and make people's interview processes better. So if there's a terrible question, whether I know the answer or not, I like to let them know that it's a terrible question and explain to them why it is. And some people take it well. Some people think I'm just so full of myself. But like, a lot of it's like, I've already gone through this pain and misery, and I can tell you're not going to get a better candidate asking that question. So I can't help myself sometimes.
And maybe that'll work for some people. I definitely, though, as you go through your different interviews, you'll get better at this. You'll start picking up common questions. You might miss a few. You'll definitely miss some. As you go through, you'll start noticing, well, everybody's asking this one question. I keep getting answered. I definitely, after the first interview, I should learn this. If by the second interview they asked the same question for a different company and I didn't learn it, then shame on me because I should have learned it. And then there's just no way. You're going to find it, usually, unless you're just some super expert or they just really give you softball questions, there's going to be questions you don't know. And it's okay to say, I don't know. And maybe you try to just kind of work it through in your head of like what you think they're asking and what you think the answer is. You're never going to know every single answer. And don't try to lie. Don't try to BS it. Just try to kind of walk it through in your head.
Yeah, it's okay to say, you know what, I'm not really sure, but this is what my guess would be, or answer it like that, or let them know. But I mean, everyone feels awkward when you just sort of bold-faced lie or bold-faced say something incorrect. That's worse than just not knowing, because you actually have something that's incorrect ingrained in your mind. And you have to understand that people are asking questions that they know the answers to. No one's asking. They're not asking you because they can't figure it out. They're asking questions they know the answer to. So make sure you're answering it correctly when you do.
Mm-hmm. So how to prepare, we'll just finish up here. Study the stack for your job description. Honestly, a lot of interviewers are kind of lazy and they just Google like interview questions for React developers or interview questions for Angular developers or common interview web developer questions. And if you can answer the top results in Google, you have a better chance of passing. Framework, if you do have a interview, you might want to just look through the different framework type questions you might get for them. And then, I think that pretty much covers all the interview prep, I would say, for non-algorithm type interviews. I would say for the most part, just be prepared. I think being prepared is, what's the Boy Scout motto? Be prepared. So that is half the battle on a lot of these technical interviews. You'll notice too, if you ever become a person that interviews other people, you'll notice people that actually did the work and actually prepared, and versus those who just walked in and thinks they know everything and realizing halfway through that they didn't study at all and they can't answer any of your questions because they didn't prepare.
I like that you say be prepared, because this leads me into my second shameless plug, which is my 100 front-end interview question challenge, which is all about being prepared for those front-end interviews, where we take the top 100 questions that you're going to be asked in these sort of technical phone calls or technical screens and sort of question type things, and making sure that you can confidently answer this stuff. And a lot of, like, as you said, is the, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, all those sorts of things that you're going to be quizzed on. There's only about 100 things that you need to know that people are going to take the top 20 results from the first search page of Google. And so whatever core technologies you're interested in, Google them, look what people are asking, and make sure you understand these concepts.
And that course will be on Udemy, right?
That's course on Udemy for $10, 10 cents an answer. Can't beat it. But all right, are we going to end it on the shameless plug? You got anything else?
No, that's good.
All right. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you want to find more about what I'm up to, go to dylanisrael.com.
And if you want to know what I'm up to, you can check out my website at eric.video. If you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And if you do, you might even be featured on our next episode. Don't forget to check out the website at selftaughtornot.com. From there, you can sign up for a mailing list where we give away free courses and a bunch of cool stuff. And we'll also let you know when the next episode comes out. And finally, if you didn't know, we have a Facebook group. It's called Code, Tech, and Caffeine. We have over 10,000 members, and you can find the link at selftaughtornot.com. So come join us. We have tons of developers willing to help you guys, mentor you guys. Check it out. Just make sure you go to selftaughtornot.com and check out the Code, Tech, and Caffeine link. Thanks, and take care.